Welcome to this Section B mini study session on punishment, extinction, and stimulus control, all aligned with the 6th edition BCBA task list. In this video, we're going to walk through slides B.6 to B.10 and turn the key terms on the screen into clear, testable ideas you can actually use on exam day. We'll hit 3 big clusters: punishment, extinction, and stimulus control, and I'll keep tying them back to common exam traps and how to read vignettes quickly under time pressure. As you listen, keep asking yourself 2 questions: what changed in the environment? And did behavior go up or down in the future? That simple lens will help you cut through a lot of confusing wording. And if you want to move from understanding to real exam performance after this walkthrough, you can jump over to BCBMockExam.com for full-length mock exams and flashcards built around this exact task list. On this slide, you see the roadmap for the video, and it's worth anchoring it in your head because these are exactly the phrases you'll see on the exam blueprint. B.6 covers positive and negative punishment, which is all about consequences that decrease behavior. B.7 separates automatic from socially mediated contingencies, which becomes critical when you're analyzing function. B.8 walks through unconditioned, conditioned, and generalized reinforcers and punishers, so you can explain where stimuli get their power. B.9 focuses on extinction, extinction bursts, and spontaneous recovery, and B.10 wraps it up with stimulus control. If you can comfortably explain each of these to someone else, you're in a strong position for Section B questions on test day. Here we zoom in on the core idea of punishment as the exam defines it. Punishment simply means a consequence follows a behavior, and the future probability of that behavior goes down in similar situations. It's not about being mean or about how something feels in the moment. Positive punishment refers to adding an aversive stimulus after the response: extra chores, extra practice drills, an unpleasant task, and over time the behavior decreases. Negative punishment refers to removing a desirable stimulus after the response: loss of tokens, loss of screen time, loss of a privilege, and again the future rate of behavior drops. When you face a B.6 item, ignore your emotional reaction to the scenario and instead track the pattern. What was added or removed, and did they clearly tell you that the behavior decreased over time? This slide is about cleaning up the language around positive and negative so those words stop tripping you during the exam. Positive punishment means you add something following the behavior, and that something functions as an aversive stimulus because the behavior becomes less likely in the future. Negative punishment means you take something away that the person values, and again you see a future decrease in the behavior. The direction of behavior change is the same in both cases. Behavior goes down. So the only difference is whether the consequence involved adding a stimulus or removing one. On test questions, mentally separate the 2 pieces. First label add versus remove. Then check whether the vignette actually describes a future decrease. If it doesn't, it isn't punishment at all. Now we apply those definitions to concrete examples, the way the exam will. Extra training laps after breaking practice rules is a classic positive punishment example. An additional, effortful activity is added, and if the design is working, rule breaking decreases over time. Losing access to a favorite toy after aggression is a classic negative punishment example. Something desirable is taken away, and aggression drops in future similar situations. The exam will often sneak the critical information into the last sentence. Over the next 2 weeks, the student's problem behavior occurred less often during class. That phrase confirms the contingency is punishers functioning as punishment, not just a consequence that looks aversive. Your job is to trace the ABC, ask what changed in the environment, and lock in whether the long-term effect was an increase or a decrease. Moving into B.7, we shift from what was the consequence to who or what delivered it. Automatic contingencies are those where the behavior itself directly produces the consequence. No other person has to act for the reinforcement or punishment to occur. Socially mediated contingencies, in contrast, require someone else to do something. The therapist hands a snack, the teacher gives a token, the parent removes an iPad. This distinction matters for both functional assessment and treatment design, and it shows up constantly in exam vignettes. As you listen to scenarios, quietly ask yourself, would this consequence still happen if no one else were in the room? If yes, you're probably looking at an automatic contingency. If no, then it's socially mediated. Here the slide tightens the definitions so you can answer classification questions quickly. A socially mediated contingency is any situation in which reinforcement or punishment is delivered by another person's action. The teacher praises, the supervisor gives feedback, the caregiver removes or restores access. An automatic contingency is one in which the behavior produces its own consequence. The sensory feedback, the reduction in pain, the visual or tactile stimulation, and no one else has to intervene. Notice that both reinforcement and punishment can be automatic or socially mediated. Automatic does not mean sensory only, and socially mediated does not mean reinforcement only. On the exam, the cleanest way to decide is to identify whether a person had to behave in order for the consequence to occur. This slide gives you a mental checklist using concrete examples. When a parent praises or scolds, when a teacher hands out points, tokens, or detention slips, those consequences are socially mediated because another person's behavior is required. When scratching an itch reduces discomfort, or when staying in the sun too long produces sunburn, those are automatic consequences. They happen even if you're alone. The exam loves to ask a simple but subtle question. Is this automatically reinforcing or socially mediated? Your quick check is the same as on the slide. Would this consequence still happen if no one else were present and doing anything? If yes, classify it as automatic. If it depends on someone else's action, it's socially mediated. In B.8, we take a step back and ask, where do reinforcers and punishers actually get their strength? Unconditioned stimuli are those that are naturally reinforcing or punishing because of biology, food, warmth, and water on the reinforcement side, intense pain, extremely loud noises, or foul taste on the punisher's side. Conditioned stimuli start out neutral but acquire reinforcing or punishing value by being paired with those unconditioned events, like stickers paired with praise or a particular tone paired with loss of privilege. Generalized conditioned stimuli are paired with many different reinforcers or punishers and therefore remain effective in a wide range of situations, such as money, tokens, or a powerful generalized no. On the exam, your job is to track the learning history. Is the stimulus naturally effective, paired with one outcome, or linked broadly to many? This slide focuses on the reinforcement half of that chart. Unconditioned or primary, reinforcers require no learning to be effective. They are inherently valuable and especially potent under deprivation. Think food when hungry or warmth when cold. Conditioned reinforcers, like stickers, tokens, or specific praise statements, begin as neutral stimuli and take on reinforcing properties through reliable pairing with other reinforcers. Generalized conditioned reinforcers, money, well-designed token systems, points that can be exchanged for many different items, are the most stable because they are backed up by multiple reinforcers and are less dependent on any one deprivation state. When a test question describes a stimulus that can be traded for many different good things or works across many situations, that's a strong cue that you're looking at a generalized conditioned reinforcer. Now we mirror that logic on the punisher side. Unconditioned punishers are events that are inherently aversive without any learning history, such as sharp pain, extremely loud noises, or intensely bitter tastes. These tend to decrease behavior the first time they occur. Conditioned punishers are stimuli that acquire aversive functions by being paired with those unconditioned punishers or with other strong punishers, like a particular angry facial expression, a "that's not okay" tone of voice, or the sight of a detention slip. Generalized conditioned punishers are signals that have been associated with many different punishers, such as a firm no, loss of status, or timeout from a broad range of preferred activities. On exam items, pay attention to how the stimulus got its power. Was it inherently aversive, paired with one punisher, or broadly linked to multiple aversive outcomes? B.9 shifts to extinction, which students often confuse with punishment, but which is conceptually distinct. Operant extinction occurs when a behavior that has historically produced reinforcement no longer contacts that reinforcement, and as a result, over time, the behavior decreases. Nothing new has to be added or taken away. Instead, the previously available reinforcer is now consistently withheld when the behavior occurs. The slide also reminds you that extinction is a change in consequences, not just a change in instructions or prompts. On the exam, When you see a scenario describing reinforcement being withheld for a behavior that used to be reinforced and the long-term direction is a decrease, you should label that extinction rather than punishment. This slide prepares you for the extinction burst, which is both clinically important and a favorite exam topic. When you first put a behavior on extinction, you often see a predictable, temporary increase in rate, intensity, or variability of that behavior. The individual pushes harder on the vending machine before giving up. That might look like louder tantrums, more insistent requests, or more creative forms of the same response. Caregivers often interpret this as it's getting worse, but behaviorally, it's a normal part of contacting the new contingency. The key exam distinction is that an extinction burst is still part of an extinction procedure. The reinforcer is not delivered, and it should be contrasted with punishment, where a specific consequence is added or removed to reduce behavior. After a behavior has decreased substantially under extinction, it can unexpectedly reappear following a break in the contingency, and that's what we call spontaneous recovery. The slide's example, problem behavior that has vanished during treatment but pops back up briefly next week before fading again if still not reinforced, is almost exactly how it shows up in vignettes. Nothing about the consequence has changed. There has simply been a delay. On the exam, you're often asked to distinguish extinction from punishment and to recognize spontaneous recovery as a temporary resurgence without new reinforcement. When you see behavior that seemed gone come back after a pause, and the plan is still to withhold reinforcement, label it spontaneous recovery and continue the extinction procedure while supporting safety. Here we move to B.10 and the concept of stimulus control, which is all about how antecedents signal whether a behavior will pay off. A behavior is said to be under stimulus control when it occurs more often in the presence of a specific antecedent than in its absence, because of a history of differential reinforcement, punishment, or extinction in those conditions. The discriminative stimulus, or SD, is the cue that signals reinforcement is available for a particular response. The S-delta signals that reinforcement is not available. The three-term contingency on the slide, SD, behavior, reinforcement versus S-delta, behavior, no reinforcement, is exactly what you'll see in many exam questions. Your job is to identify which stimulus is functioning as the SD and which is the S-delta based on the reinforcement history described. This slide grounds stimulus control in real-life situations that also make great test examples. Stopping at a red light and going on green illustrates how different colors have come to control different response patterns through long reinforcement and punishment histories. Responding to your name more readily when a preferred snack is usually offered, or going out more often when a particular friend visits because those outings have been fun, are also cases where specific antecedents signal that a behavior will contact reinforcement. On the exam, when you read a vignette, look for the consistent, when X is present, behavior Y happens and is reinforced pattern. That QX is your SD. When the same behavior happens less or does not contact reinforcement in other contexts, those contexts are playing the role of S-delta. This comparison slide helps you avoid mixing three related but distinct ideas when the clock is ticking. Punishment is about consequences. Something is added or removed after behavior, and the future probability of that behavior decreases. Extinction is about withholding reinforcement that previously maintained the behavior, usually with an initial burst followed by a decline over time. Stimulus control is about antecedents that signal whether a behavior will produce reinforcement or not, via SDs and S-deltas, without necessarily changing the consequence schedule itself. A powerful exam strategy is to decide first whether the question is manipulating consequences or antecedents, and second whether reinforcement is being changed, withheld, or just signaled. Once you sort items into these three buckets, many tricky distractors become much easier to eliminate. To wrap up B.6 through B.10, you should now be able to clearly define positive and negative punishment, separate automatic from socially mediated contingencies, distinguish unconditioned, conditioned, and generalized reinforcers and punishers, describe extinction, extinction bursts, and spontaneous recovery, and recognize when behavior is under stimulus control of an SD versus an S-delta. These concepts appear all over the BCBA exam, especially in long vignettes where you're asked to identify the contingency or choose the most appropriate intervention based on function. The next step is to turn this understanding into fast, accurate responding under exam conditions by drilling realistic questions and reviewing detailed explanations. If you found this walkthrough helpful and want full-length mocks, flashcards, and more Section B practice built by certified BCBAs and aligned with the 6th edition task list, head over to bcbmockexam.com and use these tools to lock in your passing score.